Steve and I are going to be taking you through the world of storage discovery. We'll give you an overview of what it is, a lot of terminology we're going to address today, and then we'll look at some of the architecture and the tables that are associated with storage. We'll talk about storage credentials, which are crucial to successfully discovering your storage environment, and then we'll end it with a demo. All right, Steve, we're going to talk a little bit about block storage versus file system. This is something that you shed light with me a little while ago. I wasn't really familiar with it. I've seen these terms DAS and SAN and NAS, and I guess people in the storage world kind of know this as second nature, but to someone new, how would you describe each of these three?
Block storage is like a traditional disk. It's storage which you read by sectors. You know, you read chunks of the storage at a time, and there's no organization to it. You know, when a program reads from disk, it'll say, you know, give me sector 400,000, and it gets back this block of data.
Okay.
The file system is what organizes that into something that you can actually use. You know, it gives you directories and file names. And
so a C drive, like C drive on your Windows machine, is that considered file system then?
Windows confuses things a little bit because C is both a file system and the disk that it's on, or the disk partition that it's on.
Okay. So it's got both. And what about if I stick like a remote drive into my laptop through like a USB? Is that that's considered block, I would imagine?
Yes, that's
okay.
That's block storage, but you can't really use it unless there's a file system on it.
Right, and that's where you do the formatting, I guess.
Right.
Okay.
Exactly, yes.
Yeah. Okay, perfect. And then this thing, SAN, I think this is the one that most of our customers are really looking to discover, enterprise level.
Right, that's when you have a storage array that's got possibly petabytes of storage and thousands of disks in it, and it sits off on the network somewhere, and hosts access that.
And then there's different types of networks between the host and the storage server, right? There's iSCSI, which is your traditional Ethernet network, right. And then there's this thing called Fiber Channel, which is like, from my understanding, specialized equipment in order to access the storage array from the host, right? Yes. Okay, and you just use the term petabyte.
Yes.
What is that? Is that 1,000?
It's 1,000 terabytes.
1,000 terabyte. All right, so now that we know a little bit about file system and block storage, there are lots of terms here that we need to at least have a basic understanding, and later on you'll see it in the demo, so we'll talk about that. We'll see it graphically, and we'll also see it in the demo, and you'll see what's discovered. But you know, the key pieces here are really, there's a storage server. I mean, that's the whole goal of the session, is to understand how to discover that. It's going to be contained with disks, right? Volumes,
right? Pools,
all these different types of terms, but this is all that extra storage, which you mentioned the term petabytes before. So petabytes, I mean, that's just tons of storage, and it's basically which your host server has access to. So instead of having storage on each host server, you can have a host server have access to a storage server, and multiple hosts can access that. And I assume there's also some rebalancing that can take place with the storage server. So
yes.
One host needs more storage, then it can be easily transferred, right? So those are some of the advantages we have there. So those are two pieces. You have the host that needs to have some place to store information and data, and that happens through a storage server. Now, there's going to be a network that exists between the host server and the storage server, and they come in two flavors. There's your traditional Ethernet network, known as iSCSI, in the storage world, and this basically is made up of your switches and routers and Ethernet cables and all that kind of good stuff. And it's the traditional network that we're familiar with. Is there anything more special about that? Is that
typically
different adapters, right? Is there?
Yeah, so typically, I mean, it's going to be high speed, and typically it's not going to be connected to the internet because you don't want some random guy in Minnesota accessing your storage.
That makes sense. Yeah.
So it'll be on a private network. But yes, you nailed it.
And then we have this thing called a fiber channel network. So a fiber channel network, obviously you can see the speeds here are 2, 4, 8, or 16 gigabytes per second. So that's a lot faster because traditional Ethernet is 101,000, from what I've been seeing. And so this is obviously much, much faster. Key things here is that this is specialized equipment. You see something like a fiber channel switch. What are you seeing, Steve, with our customers? Do they tend to run this over traditional Ethernet, or is it more fiber channel that you're seeing out there?
I think it varies a lot. I think customers tend to standardize on one or the other. For the most part, I guess I would say there's more fiber channel.
Okay.
than iSCSI.
Yeah, which makes sense. But I guess the disadvantage is that you're paying for additional equipment. You can't kind of
And
utilize
it's
what's
expensive
there.
equipment.
And
Yes.
it's expensive, right? Absolutely. So when you hear the term fabric, that's just kind of that's really talking about everything, right? The fabric is your switches, your
Right.
storage, and everything that's considered fabric.
Well,
Or
it's the switches and the cabling between it, right?
the
I mean,
cable.
it
Okay.
forms it's
A
like the
fabric.
fabric in your shirt, right? It's all the cables that are
Okay.
connecting.
And then we have this thing, the SIM server. I guess this is really one of the more important parts of this whole discovery is that we have an SIM server. You say that it's kind of interchangeably used like SMIS server. You might see it
Right.
basically
Right.
spoken in either way. But this SIM server, from my understanding, and correct me if I'm wrong, is it discovers or it understands basically your storage environment, your storage arrays, your storage server, and all of that. And so when we run discovery from ServiceNow Discovery using our mid server, we're actually discovering the SIM server, which then will expose everything around the storage network.
Right, exactly. Yeah, every vendor uses they all have proprietary interfaces. They often use their own terminology, which can be very confusing.
Mm-hmm.
So SMIS or SIM is just a standardized way that lets us write one storage probe to discover this.
And so something that you had also shed light on me, Steve. You can see you've shed light on me a lot. But yeah, so that is that we actually don't discover the storage server itself.
Not directly.
Right.
Correct.
We discover the SIM server, which then tells us about the storage server.
Exactly.
Correct? Okay. And also the SIM server, will it know about the host server?
No.
It won't. So how do we discover that?
You have to discover the host independently as you discover any other host.
So that's important when we think about setting up discovery, a full, if we want to get everything, our fabric, our storage server, and our host server, we actually have to discover the SIM server and the host server.
Yes.
Correct.
And one limitation that we have is that you have to discover the storage server first. We only create relationships from the host to the storage during host discovery.
Very good to know. And one other thing you mentioned is that the mid server, I talked about connectivity. The mid server needs to have access to the SIM server and the host server, but it doesn't need to have access necessarily to the switches or the storage server because that will be given to us through the
SIM server.
Through the SIM
right.
server.
So the SIM server needs access to
the
it.
SIM server needs access. And that's really something that's set up on the customer side. That's really
Right. Exactly.
nothing that we would be doing as an implementation team, right? Theoretically. Hopefully not.
Yeah.